Today, Kate O'Donnell, author of several books on Ayurveda, joins me to talk about Ayurveda. Kate, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Brandy. It's great to be here.
Can you share okay, first of all, we'll maybe start with how you discovered Ayurveda. I feel like I have an unfair advantage because I already know a little bit of your backstory. However, listeners might just be introduced to you for the first time. So.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in New England in the US. And when I was 19, I joined this kind of study abroad program to study community, sustainability, and spirituality. And so we visited all these different sort of places. And one of them was Oroville in South India. And when I landed on Indian soil, I was just like, there was no looking back, kind of. I was just taken with the place and kind of like ended up spending 6 months in India at that time and doing a service project teaching English. I actually didn't get into Ayurveda on that trip. I did get into yoga on that trip. But what I did get was a lot of parasitic infections, like very seriously. And I was sick for a couple of years and kept going back and forth to India, which didn't help, So I just had like all these digestive problems and like every kind of bug that you can have living in your intestines. And it was my second trip back that I found an Ayurvedic physician because things were just bad. And I followed his program for me, which was to do a Panchakarma, it's sort of like the crown jewel of Ayurvedic medicine for sort of like more progressed disorders. And it's a residential program, it's a residential thing. So I was like at an Ayurveda hospital for a month and just kind of like did whatever they told me and ate what they told me to. And I just had a life-changing experience there where I felt my physical body as a spiritual vehicle. In some way, it like some portal opened during this month-long sort of, because you do, it's a very deep cleansing process and it changes your cells. I think it changes your epigenetics also. So like everything was like, there's before and after that month of my life. And so I had merged with this sort of different understanding of reality and of the body within it. And that is what I had been searching for since I was like 14. I had been like reading all these like weird texts about Buddhism or whatever I could find. And so I was like, this is it. This is what I want. This is what I've been looking for. And I just kind of started reading whatever I could about Ayurveda. I was back and forth to India and the States. I finished, came back, finished college, all that kind of stuff, and continued kind of every year or two going back and spending a few months in India and studying yoga and just kind of undergoing Ayurvedic treatments and definitely rehabilitating my digestive system after everything that had gone on. And, at that time, it was like, I wasn't clear how to study Ayurveda. Whereas now you can study Ayurveda, like you can do a yoga TT.
Right.
Yeah. So at the time I was just kind of like reading and like living and just being in India and just like kind of integrating a lot of these principles into my life. And then about 10 years later, I actually went to the Kripalu School of Ayurveda. One of my mentors sort of told me about it, recommended it. And I did like a year-long study in the English language of Ayurveda with a bunch of different teachers, from all over. And that was when I started to realize that, like this is a thing you can like study. And I started to realize there's this whole back end of Ayurvedic anatomy, physiology, disease process, this really deep science that is very much intertwined with the practice of yoga also. So it's just this like lens that I use to view the body. And as a teacher, I was a yoga teacher for all of those years. The Ayurveda has just helped me to understand bodies and see
Yeah.
bodies, and it's an epic science. And I have taken it upon myself with these books that I write to kind of make it as accessible as possible and to create entry points, for people wherever they're at in life to kind of start working with some of the principles in their life. And then, we can always go deeper later on, but I found that a lot of people were quite intimidated or didn't know where to start. Like I didn't know where to start,
Right.
20 some years ago. So it's definitely been a journey that started with my own health and all those parasites. And it definitely worked. I think it took 5 years for my gut to be like, not totally weird.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, within 10 years, I was like, okay, I'm cool, but it took a while.
Okay, the piece that I'd like to dive into first out of your answer for that is the spiritual piece, because I feel like I was very much like you where, well, maybe not like, maybe I'm doing an inaccurate comparison here. My approach to Ayurveda was purely to help heal myself to begin with. And what I've discovered as I've gotten more and more into it, and I'm definitely a scientific minded person, but what I've gotten as I've gotten more and more into it is just how much that shift in my own perspective and in spirituality is really being affected by my knowledge of Ayurveda, which I mean, it's such a, it really is such a beautiful piece of it. Could you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I love that you're asking about that. I think we're at this interesting time where, with like quantum physics, for example, where sort of perception of reality is actually a consideration, even in the scientific method, and I feel like the Vedic sciences are very much rooted in like having a clear perception of reality, of like the human soul and its place in a cosmological world. And it's so easy to just like do your day-to-day life and not have the time or the space or this inspiration to consider reality.
Yeah.
Like, and so when you start to study Ayurveda, it's like, okay, we're going to start with the Panch Mahabhutas, which are the 5 elements. And it's like the first thing that you learn are about the building blocks of tangible matter, the space element, air, fire, water, earth. And so you learn about how matter is manifesting in the cosmos through these elements. And so some things are wet, some things are dry, and some things are hot, and some things are cold, because of their elemental composition. And then the human body is also made of these same exact building blocks. So there's this microcosm, macrocosm, fundamental principle in the Ayurveda that human beings are affected by our environment. And so much of the science is about learning to live harmoniously with the rhythms around us. So like when you're living in concert with the rhythms of sunrise and sunset, for example, you're going to bed kind of closer to sunset and waking up closer to sunrise. It's like you're rowing your boat along with the stream of energy in the universe, just life energy in the universe. So you're rowing your boat along with it, and you're kind of being carried in this current of cohabitation, with the sun and the earth and the body and the food we eat and all these things. Whereas when we are sort of not living in concert with the rhythms around us, like we stay up all night, go to bed in the morning, the body's getting all these mixed messages. It's like we're not living harmoniously with our environment, and it does cause health problems because it's like you're rowing your boat sort of in the against the current
Yeah.
of nature's rhythms, you know. And to me, this is also the basis of yogic science, is about this union of an individual with a universal principle. So it's like microcosm, macrocosm, like as a human, we are a part of it. We're a part of it, you know, and we are natural creatures, and we are a part of this natural environment. And so everything that we do, like I like to think of food as the spiritual path, because food is how we take in the 5 elements. You know, like a carrot's bringing you, you know, all these different amounts of water and air and earth element. So we eat the carrot, we digest the carrot, it becomes our tissues, and we're a part of it.
Yeah.
You know, we're linked in. Where I think a lot of our sort of spiritual crises that I think a lot of us feel can come just from a disconnect, not feeling like we're living harmoniously with the influences around us.
Right. And to your point of rowing with the stream or fighting against it, and it just taking so much more energy when you're fighting against it. And because I think that's another piece of it, is because Ayurveda really is all about the subtleties, and us not really recognizing just how much energy it takes just to live on a day-to-day basis, much less, especially when we're fighting against nature's rhythms.
Absolutely. Yeah. The way I describe it is like, it just kind of makes you get tired of rowing. You just get tired, you know, and then systems start to break down and not operate optimally, and problems happen.
Yeah. So so I wanted to circle back around to Panchakarma, because this is something that, of course, I have questions about myself, and then also something that it feels like there are so many of these at-home Panchakarma cleanses now available. So what are your views on this broad question? What are your views on Panchakarma as a whole, and then more specifically, some of these at-home cleanses versus a full Panchakarma at a clinic?
Yeah, they're definitely different. So Panchakarma is getting some press because Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, mentioned last season that he did a Panchakarma as a part of his health regimen. So
okay.
Yeah, so
It's
getting some press, which is kind of exciting. So it's, I mean, in my world, I would say there's no such thing as an at-home Panchakarma.
Okay.
You know, that's call me staunch, you know, but that's kind of how I feel. I feel because when you do a residential Panchakarma, you take a lot of the variables away.
Okay.
You know, because most of the centers are going to be places where the sensory stimulation is at an absolute minimum.
Okay.
You know, so you're like in this very natural environment where all of the products that are being used to clean the place, to clean the body, like your shampoo, your toothpaste, all of those things don't contain any chemicals. Because I think chemicals are one of our big problems right now.
Yeah.
And one of the things where Panchakarma excels is at actually dredging those kind of toxins that are lodged in the tissues of the body. So I do think it's a treasure. Like this kind of therapy is a treasure. But in order for the body to do an overhaul like that, one really needs to take away a lot of the other activities or stimulations that will sort of take your attention away from this internal process. So it's like your all your body's energy. I'll say it's like all hands on deck in the internal pathways of the body. So the things that we do on a regular basis, like clean the house, take care of the family, drive the car, listen to music. All these sorts of things are ways that we divert our attention from a very sort of deep internal process that's going on when you're doing, Panchakarma. And there's a preparation period of the body that goes on for usually about 7 days, where you sort of arrive at the center and they sort of like, the doctors assess. And the part of doing a residential Panchakarma is also that your physician is there every day, checking in on changes as they go.
Yeah.
Because your body, some whole thing might change in your body, which might change the protocol that you're going to follow because, something happens. So you undergo a 7-day process where ama, or sort of like toxins, are pulled out of the digestive tract and potentially out of the deeper tissues as well. And that's through things like applying substances to the body on a daily basis for like an hour. You'll have like several people sort of applying these substances to the body that sort of pull things to the surface.
Yeah.
Or therapies that open the channels so that things can kind of like get into a flow of detox, get into the lymphatic system, in order to be removed. So there's a lot of letting go. There's a lot of letting go that's happening in the body. And I do feel it has to happen mentally as well. One has to kind of surrender and accept and allow the channels to open and the tissues to soften so that the junk can get sort of pulled out into circulation in the body, which is a horrible feeling. It's an awful like couple of days while that's going on. We were like, what's happening to me? Where the toxins are like moving, they're circulating through the blood and into the lymph and like then into the digestive tract. And then is the Panchakarmas, which are the 5 actions, which are performed. Not all 5, it's usually just 1, sometimes 2. It could be vomiting, it could be purgation, like pooping a lot. It could be enema. It could be something in the head and sinuses that happens through the nasal passage. It could also, one of the old school is bloodletting, which is used much less. You might see leaching at some centers now. So those 5 actions, that's how stuff then gets released from the body. And so the thing about doing it at home, I think, is the likelihood of maybe something not going according to plan.
Yeah.
So I think you could be consulting with a physician via, say, Zoom or something daily, and they're like asking you all these questions and kind of like monitoring your progress and telling you what to do on a daily basis. And I think that kind of a thing can work. And I think a lot of what these like at home cleanses are, like, I don't teach Purva Karma. That's the beginning 7-day process, which in some cases involves digesting ghee, which is clarified butter. It's a very sort of easy to digest fat. And that's actually the vehicle that washes through the tissues. So it gets pushed through all the tissue layers in the body over this sort of 7-day period, give or take. And that's what I think when you say at-home Panchakarma, you're talking about people doing this process at home of taking the ghee every day. You go through this 7-day process where you do oil massage and you take these doses of ghee on an empty stomach and you eat very, very, very simple food, right, so as not to disturb, the ghee making its way into the tissues. And a lot of the toxins that we're talking about are fat soluble. So fat cleans fat.
Yeah.
That's the wisdom of, which is backed up by modern science now, to this idea that you can use fat to clean the body.
Right.
And so it's, I think a lot of people do a 7-day process like that at home, where you take the ghee and, you give it 7 days, and then you might do a purgative at the end, where you poop a lot and sort of clear out whatever has made its way into the digestive tract. You get rid of that. And that is incredibly beneficial if one has correct guidance, and one has like prepared for that properly. it's excellent. If one has not prepared properly, like if the digestion is not ready for that amount of ghee, then it can make things worse.
Right.
You know, it can make things a lot worse. You start pounding the digestion with these amounts of fat that the body can't handle, then things are just going to get more clogged. So I think that it's just about sort of having the proper guidance, knowing what you're after by doing this at home, you know, and I think that it's absolutely a beneficial thing to do periodically with correct guidance. But I just want to be clear for our listeners that there's this whole other thing that goes on in a residential Panchakarma center with experienced physicians. It's a good card to play for people who really can't find relief from their disease in other places. It's like, oh, we should consider, you know, is Panchakarma something that might reverse this for you?
So with the residential, so you mentioned a 7-day prep period. It sounds like probably maybe 2 to 3 days of actual Panchakarma, and then there's a follow-up period as well, at all performed in residence. What's kind of the total quote unquote minimum length or normal length for one of those?
Yeah, minimum is 3 weeks.
Okay.
And people will stay 5 or 6 weeks also, because the prep is 7 days, but it could be more.
Yeah.
And then the sort of the actual punching of the karma, which is a joke, but like the actual performance of those 5 karmas, that's going to take some days.
Okay.
In many cases, like if you're doing enemas, there's a system of 7 enemas that happen over the course of 7 days.
Okay.
So it could be that kind of a thing where it's going on for a number of days. And then what follows is the rejuvenation period, where your body is like a clean slate.
Yeah.
After everything you've been through for the past 2 or 3 weeks. And this is where I think people need to take care with doing these sorts of things at home.
Right.
Is because you're very sensitive after, you know, for like a month or more. You know, personally, I feel the effects for 6 months after.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't feel like myself again for 6 months. And it's not a bad thing, you know, it's, and this is like from a complete overhaul. You know, sometimes a Panchakarma can actually be gentle if the person is not so strong at that time or has a lot of demands on them, you know. But that rejuvenation period is really important, where you settle all the disturbance from the actions that have been performed, and you stay inside this cocoon to protect the body, because actually it's very easy to get like sick or to get imbalances during this time, because things are so sensitive. It's like a baby, you know, and so the immune system's rebuilding, everything's rebuilding, the tissues are rebuilding. And so it's a wonderful time to stay at the center, and all the food that they give you is clean. You know, you're still not around any toxic substances in terms of cleaners or body products, and because your body's going to soak that stuff up. Right. There's all these spaces created in the tissues by the removal, and so those spaces are like kind of hungry. You know, for filling. It's like a jelly donut, you know, so it's like looking for that filling. And so that is like such an important period to make sure that the filling going into the spaces is what you want it to be. Okay. You know, when you're just back in your life running around, you have a lot less control over that. And then they'll give you rejuvenative medicines or herbal products for about 3 months that you can take home with you and continue to take. And it kind of is continuing to work against whatever disease process you came there with, or just rehabilitate the body in whatever way is necessary for an individual.
Okay. All right, maybe one more question around Panchakarma. So with this, could you talk through what kinds of diseases you would consider Panchakarma for, and then any potential contraindications. So one of the things that I have heard from a few people is oftentimes, it's especially Americans, we're not strong enough to undergo Panchakarma. And so it's recommended to do other palliative treatments or to just build up your body, support your body in other ways instead of Panchakarma.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a funny one because a lot of people, I love this conversation, by the way, because I don't often go like this far into this particular topic, which I think a lot of people are curious about. So this is great. But it's funny because the way that I talk about Panchakarma is like, it's like a card that you play in your life and you don't just throw it down whenever, because you only have that one ace card.
Yeah.
And so I don't think of Panchakarma as something that like, oh, people should do Panchakarma, like, every year or something like that. Maybe some people should, but I don't think it's across the board a good idea, for everyone to undergo something this rigorous. As you say, not everyone is strong enough. And I think what I see with Westerners as a problem, like you mentioned, is that a lot of people do not have a supportive infrastructure in their life to support the changes that happen when you undergo Panchakarma. Because, for instance, your relationship to certain foods might change.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, wow, I'm so sensitive to coffee now. Like I used to be able to do it. I have all these coffee dates on my calendar, and you come back and you're like, you don't want to drink coffee anymore. Because if you do, it's going to cause all these problems, and the body is going to get pissed off.
Yeah.
If you do it. So you come back, and this is why I don't just always send people off for Panchakarma, because they have to be ready not only to undergo it, but also to come home.
Yeah.
It's, I think, the hardest thing, because you've changed your epigenetics. You're expressing in a different way after you undergo a process like that. And the world around you, I always describe, whenever I come home from a trip to India, I'll say circle in the square. Those kids' toys, the wooden toys where there's like a triangle and a square and a circle. And the feeling I always have when I come home is like, I'm a circle now, but I'm like trying to get shoved. Life is shoving me into the square, and I'm just like banging my head against the wall, And so I think that, as you say, sort of palliative regimens, a lot of the things like the very simple daily and seasonal regimens, that's a lot of what I teach, is just these very basic things where we're not trying to overhaul the system. We're not trying to rock the boat too much. We're trying to instill these rhythms in our life and start kind of rowing the boat along with the life stream to the best of our ability, and I think once we get that infrastructure set up in the life, we're better candidates, to undergo Panchakarma. At other times, however, I might say like Panchakarma is a really great way to handle systemic inflammation. For example, one of the things that a lot of people are suffering from, or early stage autoimmune, I think Panchakarma is really excellent for autoimmune disorders. Not to say like you go one time and do a month and you're cured. That can happen, but what will happen is you'll gain a very deep understanding of the causative factors for this disorder, what the triggers are, and how to work with that. You'll learn herbal medicines that you can use and continue to take potentially for a long period of time to manage the disorder. And you create a relationship with the doctors there, who know about your body. So in a time when I think inflammation is kind of rampant.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to think, Brandy, like the more I talk about this and think about this, there's all this research about sort of soil science, the quality of our food, and the nature of commercial agriculture. vegetables, dairy, meats, all of it, all the chemicals. I mean, our bodies are like partially plastic now, like we're really being barraged with chemicals that are, in Ayurveda, there's this word sukshma, which means subtle. And so the kind of chemicals that we're in contact with on a daily basis all the time are subtle. They're like, imagine these tiny, tiny molecules, tiny little nanoparticles that have an ability to infiltrate the body. It's not like you ate a piece of dirt or there was a rock in your beans, it's like these nanoparticles that are able to infiltrate our tissues and lodge in the body and cause cellular dysfunction.
Yes. And to that point, I think one of the great tragedies is the fact that when you go to, of course, the sickest among us wind up in a hospital being treated through tubes that are made of plastics. And so we wind up with even more of these microplastics in our blood and in our bodies.
Right. Yeah. So again, there's this, if we are looking at sort of the problem of sort of toxins in the body and how they cause, I think a lot of this inflammation we're seeing has to do with stress, and also with these subtle particles in the body. And that is where Panchakarma is great. Everything we've talked about already with cleaning fat and fat soluble toxins and chemicals in the body. And I think Panchakarma has the ability to sort of reset the body's natural healing response in the way that it gets out of control during, say, an autoimmune expression. So I think when we're looking to sort of manage inflammation and all the diseases that we're now diagnosing, that can be drawn back to inflammation of different kinds, that is a great time to consider Panchakarma.
Okay. Can you talk more broadly about who you work with? So it's aside from your teaching, because you also work with clients one-on-one as well, right? And then in addition, you offer courses, so in kind of more of a group setting. Can you talk some more about your one-on-one work and I guess your approach when it comes to working one-on-one with clients?
Yeah. To be honest, I am less of a clinician and more of a teacher. Like that's been true for me from the beginning. I keep a one-to-one practice going because it is how I learn the most. Yeah. It's like Ayurveda is all theory until it's in a body. Yeah. So, you know all the things that happen to bodies. And I'm not an Ayurvedic doctor. I'm not at that doctorate level. Most of the people in this country now who have a doctor level Ayurveda education are from India. Right. It's a very new thing for the education to be available here at that level within like the past couple of years. That's available now. And I'll refer out for sure to people who have sort of like they're more far along the line in the expression of, say, an autoimmune disorder or a disease. And I do a lot less interfacing with Western medicines and diagnostics. So if somebody's coming to me with like all this blood work and a list of meds that they're on and a team of Ayurvedic or of Western physicians they're working with, that is a can of worms that some Ayurvedic practitioners and doctors will absolutely have that knowledge and be able to interface like that. I do not. So therefore, again, I'll refer people who have more of that going on. So I would say that with my practice, I work more with I'll certainly get digestive disorders all the time. That's kind of my favorite. And those are the ones where the gastroenterologist can't find anything wrong. Yeah. They can't find anything wrong, but this person is having basically, say, IBS symptoms, for example. Yeah. Or really pernicious skin problems. Yeah. And I find that I especially like working with people who have sort of exhausted other methods and no one can find anything wrong. Right. And that's where I think Ayurveda just comes in and is like a different perspective. And so it can be like, oh, because we make connections that maybe wouldn't be made, from a Western perspective. And so we'll look at things like sleep and diet and the biorhythms and the stress. All of that is a part of the picture. And the spirituality, to be honest. I mean, there's a sense that a person is a circle in the square sometimes. And you're like, the reason for this disorder, I can feel it, is because this person feels like a circle in the square.
Yeah.
How do we get this life into a context where the person feels like they're in a harmonious relationship with everything around them, or at least some of it?
Yeah.
So there's a very broad view, broad way to describe it, but I can't tell you how often it comes down to that. And so that's where with Ayurveda, you can look at this big picture, and we're not trained as psychotherapists. We're not doing any of that, although we can see that might be a referral that's necessary. We could see that might be a part of the causative storm that's making this disorder. So the causative factors are coming from all these different places, which in a compartmentalized view is very difficult to stand back and see. And so it's like we're seeing the whole story of a person's life and the context in which they're living it. And that's where things start to be revealed, I think. And sometimes it's simple, like you're drinking too much coffee. And sometimes it's, oh, you're not pooping because you're scared of your boss. There are things your PCP it would be hard for them to know that, in the way that a session happens. So, just to know so much about when a person eats and when they sleep and, how they interact with their daily life it's a really big part of why things go wrong.
And I love that you mentioned this holistic view of looking at everything. And also, I think the fact that Ayurveda considers there are 6 stages of disease rather than just the last 2, which Western medicine is able to look at. Yep. So totally agree with you on both of those points. So with your okay, so I had a question about some of the classes that you offer in kind of more of a group setting, and specifically the one that is most interesting right now. You have one on menopause. I wanted to talk about menstruation as a whole in the Ayurvedic context.
Yeah, so it is a big topic for sure. I think what is so helpful about looking at menstruation through an Ayurveda lens is that menstruation actually gives you a ton of information about your health.
Yeah.
And I think women potentially have felt sort of mystified by the menstrual cycle and its changes, where the perspective here is more that there's this sort of co-creation between a person and their menstrual cycle, that the menstrual cycle is a reflection of your daily living choices throughout that month.
Yeah.
And so the cycle can appear in different ways, and PMS is changing. And so instead of that being, I think the Ayurvedic lens can give us all this info about what your period is telling you about your health or your food choices or whatever. And then instead of being what the hell is wrong with this? I need to fix it. I think that's been the way that we have approached it previously, is let's fix this. It's not like that. It's actually, it's like the lifestyle that needs to be fixed, in order for the period to then express in a way that's just very smooth and easy. and not this big thing, and it's a really important thing that people with wombs menstruate. Like, it is not a good idea not to have a cycle, that's something that I do see some use of birth control methods that stop a cycle like that. It would be a big no in the Ayurvedic view. It's a time where the body is balancing itself. The blood is actually being renewed during that time. And that's an important thing that needs to happen. And it's also a cleansing of that passage, which otherwise doesn't really have a lot of ways to clean itself.
Okay.
It's like deep inside, and we don't want virus or bacteria living up there. And so one of the things about a menstrual cycle is that it cleans out an interior space.
Okay.
So something needs to be coming out, as a cleanse.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question specifically about the 5 vayus? And so it could be because you mentioned the use of birth control for eliminating cycles altogether. And so when we're speaking in terms of the 5 vayus, what is going on with that downward motion when it's kind of a forced stagnation in women? So how do you see that playing out as a whole, or what in an Ayurvedic context, what could that be creating?
Yeah. Definitely a stagnation of the pelvic area, right? So this downward moving force in the body, we call apana vayu. So the yoga people will have heard that also as the downward movement, and prana is the upward movement. And so the prana, the apana vayu, when we're talking menstruation, we're talking apana. This is the whole conversation, is about the health of the apana vayu, which is the energy flow that moves below the navel and it goes down.
Yeah.
We also have our circulation, which is a different flow, right? That goes in and out and in and out. And we have like the thing that makes us talk and puke and burp, udana vayu, that's just this from the stomach out the mouth. So there's these different sort of currents in the body. And so this one that moves below the navel is responsible for pooping, peeing, menstruating, as well as sort of transferring energy through the hips and into the legs. So the problems that we see, I will say that just in my practice working with people, the biggest problem that I run into appears to be a recruitment of energy to the head.
Okay.
Stealing from the lower regions, basically.
Okay.
Right. So say we have like 5 units of life energy in the body. Each one is assigned to the 5 different currents and their jobs, their physiological functions. And then this one up here, the sense organs and the attention, right? And the mind and all the hubbub, we're tasting, we're listening, we're talking, we're looking, we're thinking, we're reading, we're watching, all this happens above the neck. And so this thing's taking up like 3 units.
Yeah.
So it's being removed, it's being stolen from somewhere else, right? And so the downward flow to me appears to be the one that is paying the price.
Okay.
In a lot of bodies, and menstruating bodies especially need this space, this time, and this energy in order to do this process. Okay. Right, which is a renewal of the blood and also a protection and the cleansing of the womb and the vaginal channel. So we want to support that energy, that downward flow, right? Which could look like just reducing the demands that are coming from everything above the head, which means maybe a little less watching, talking, reading, listening, right? A little less of all of these stimulating things that we do and allowing energy to just kind of drop down, which I think for people who are accustomed to being in motion all the time, it's a scary feeling to allow energy to drop below the navel, because you feel like it's going to slow you down.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of our fundamental problems, is not wanting to be slowed down by the menstrual cycle. When, I have this thing I say in one of my books: for all the go, go, go in one's life, there also needs to be an equal amount of slow, slow, slow. So the menstrual cycle is actually like this ideal time to focus on creating a balance in our energy body, right? So that we slow, slow, slow a little bit, and that's why some women will complain of things like brain fog during the menstrual cycle, and that's because all this hubbub up here, we've removed a unit of energy, right? And we've sent it below the navel to do this job. And I think if we were to embrace this view of the body, it's like, oh, of course that's happening. That's natural.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, why am I dumb when I'm menstruating? This is awful. It's like, well, actually, let's, when possible, move a little slower, be a little less productive, on those days, because the body is actually producing this other massive action, which again has purpose and is very important for our health. That we have that cleansing of the blood layer, because we drop some and then we make new blood, and that new blood is all fresh and shiny.
Yeah.
And compared to what was dropped. And that's why women get cravings for hamburgers, or whatever it is, chocolate, kind of high iron food, totally natural.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense. Eat it. Awesome. Whenever it comes, some women crave it before they bleed, some right after. It's like, whenever it comes, it's part of the deal. It's just food for building the new blood. So the thing with the apana, I think that's my biggest, in my practice, that's the thing I've come to see as the biggest problem is the units being recruited up above. And so we lose energy down below.
Okay. And with Ayurveda finally made me recognize that, because there are certain things and there are certain rituals or practices, even in Ayurveda, and especially, I'm from a Christian background, and so reading the Old Testament and saying, why can't menstruating women do this? It wasn't until seeing it through the lens of Ayurveda and understanding that it's because we need this downward motion instead of this upward motion that it clicked on why menstruating women, it's actually for their health.
Right. Absolutely. And is supportive of not only the fertility principle, but also the health.
Yeah.
Of them. Like, I don't have kids. I do not intend to have kids, but my menstrual cycle is incredibly important to me. I watch it kind of like a hawk, because I'm like, okay, did I drink too much wine this month? Oops, or am I too busy or stressed? Like, for me, it's stress is the thing. If I'm like tweaking out about something, I'll have pain. I'll have cramps, and pain. And then it's just like, okay, like, we need to mellow down. There's tension in the body that, is building up over the course of the month. And because the body recruits all this energy to do this cleansing activity monthly, to me, that is prime time to row my boat with that stream and take advantage of that. So it's a time to take stock of what happened during the previous month. How was that working for me? And I'll certainly rest. I'll do yoga postures that induce apana, downward moving flow. I'll eat foods that are warm, moist, dense, things that go down in the body, as opposed to like popcorn, which goes out and up. And I'll just really enjoy that time as a renewal, of sorts. And to me, it is sort of a spiritual experience. And if I'm like too busy, if I have too much planned during that time, I'm bummed. I'm bummed out. I feel like I won the lottery if I have like nothing to do on
Yeah.
one of the happy days of the cycle. Yeah.
Kate, this was so much fun to have a chance to sit down with you. I have about a million more questions. To be respectful of your time, it's time to put an end on this one. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you'd like to share? And then how can people find you?
So, you know, if people are excited and want to learn more, I would say, you know, starting, if you're a book person, starting with any of my 3 books is a good place. You know, the first 2 are cooking books. So half the book is like info and the other half is recipes. And so those are good places to start if one is interested in the food piece.
Yeah.
And the Everyday Ayurveda Guide to Self-Care, that one goes like really deep into sort of the daily and seasonal routines, which I feel like we talked about the importance of that a lot. So that's a good place to go. And the reason that I've started the online stuff, which is that it's ayurvedicliving.institute. That's where I run all my programs. Some of them are live, like I have a membership where we meet once a month as a group. As well as courses on topics like menstruation, you know, seasonal self-care and that sort of thing. I started doing that because when we're trying to make changes, like we're talking about kind of changing our habits and our behaviors and our choices a lot of the time here, I find that people report how difficult that is to do in one's life where you feel like you're the only one doing it. And that the need for community support just kept coming back and kept coming back. And so that's what I'm trying to do with this Ayurvedic Living Institute, is create sort of community programs where people can come together in a group to undergo some sort of process. Like our seasonal cleanses are a great thing, a really popular thing that people come together and do this sort of 10-day program and get to learn a lot about Ayurveda, notice changes in the body. And it seems to me that learning in community and changing in community is a lot more supportive.
Yeah.
Some people can just pick up a book and like run with it, but I think other people the book just sits there on the shelf. So it's for those people who I would send towards maybe online programs and courses and things that are a little more interactive, if that works better for some folks.
I love that you're building a community for people to find that support, because it is, I mean, I can speak for one, and I have incredible support at home. However, my husband's not going to convert to an Ayurvedic diet. So it is, even for me, it's quite challenging, and he's incredibly supportive. He's just not going to do it for himself. So anyways, so I love that you're providing that. I think that is so helpful.
Yeah, it seems like it is, you know, it seems like people are getting a lot out of it. So it's really rewarding. And as a lot of us know, I think a lot of listeners too, like working online, it's like, you got to get some people around, you know.
Yeah.
So that feels really good. And it's also really lovely to talk with you like this. And I love to hear the different things people are thinking about and questioning, and keep a conversation going.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.